Perfect murder, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. There is no such thing as a perfect murder. That's just an illusion.
My name's Peter Swanson, and my newest thriller is called Rules for Perfect Murders. It is a crime thriller set really amongst the world of crime thrillers because the main protagonist, Malcolm Kershaw, is a bookstore owner and book blogger who has created a list of what he considers the 8 most perfect fictional murders in crime fiction history. And what he finds out a few years after creating this list via an FBI agent who comes to his door one snowy morning in Boston, Massachusetts, is that it looks like someone is using his list to commit actual murders across New England. So the Red House Mystery by A.A. Milne is a real curiosity because, of course, A.A. Milne is the author of Winnie the Pooh, which is what he's famous for, but he wrote one crime novel, and it's a very good one. So what's kind of surprising is that he never wrote another one. It's a classic sort of golden age mystery, almost in a P.G. Wodehouse mode. It's quite comical, but it has a very, very clever idea at its root about how to commit a crime. And without giving too much away, what happens at the beginning of the book is one person is murdered and someone else, someone who would maybe have liked to have murdered that person, has disappeared. So what you're seeing is someone who's committed a homicide has run away, and that's sort of hiding the truth of the crime. So I've always thought that was a very clever book, and I was happy to use it. So Strangers on a Train by Patricia Highsmith, a book I've always loved, a book I've referenced in a previous novel of mine, Kind Worth Killing, which is the classic murder swap, which is, 2 people each have a murder they want to commit. But if that murder is committed, they'll be the most likely suspect. So why not swap murders and make sure that the likely suspect is far away from the victim as possible? Again, a sort of perfect murder in theory. I think in reality, one fraught with problems, mainly that someone else knows your secret. But it was brilliantly done in Strangers on a Train. I've always loved that concept. And that was one of the books that as soon as I came up with a concept for Rules for Perfect Murders, I knew I had to include that. The Secret History by Donna Tartt was the last book I included in the list. And one of the things, I was making the list myself, but I was also having Malcolm Kershaw, the main character in the book, make the list. And he says at one point, I did want to include something contemporary or fairly contemporary into the book series, book list. Because I think when you are creating a book list, and I do quite a bit myself as an author, a bit from Golden Age, a bit from mid-century, and a bit from contemporary. I'd always loved Donna Tartt's Secret History, and I did remember that there was this clever thing, and I'm not giving away any spoilers in this one because this is a book that tells you right up front who's killed. It was in the first sentence that this group of students have killed a fellow student named Bunny by pushing him off a cliff during his hike. But the way they sort of, so the book is much more about why they did that and then the ramifications for that. But the way they set up the murder is they decide that they'll let Bunny choose his own murder, in the sense that he goes out on these long rambling walks and they'll just wait for him at a place he might arrive to. And they figure if he does, they can push him off. If he doesn't, they can't. It's really a huge, massive rationalization. They're still out to murder him. But there's this sort of very clever idea that they think, then in retrospect, people will be like, oh yeah, he always walked past that. He occasionally walked past that dangerous part, and they would get away with it that way. So I did think there was a concealment and a clever crime embedded in that book.
My pre-writing phase is often quite long, and by that it can be like a couple of years of having an idea and having it sort of recur to me. So sometimes, I'm sort of at some point in the next few months, I think I'll be starting a new book, and there's a couple ideas that are fighting in my head for dominance over this. So my pre-writing is all thinking. I don't even start writing down. I don't usually start doing any kind of outlining or sketching. It's just thinking about it and keeping it all in my head. And eventually what will happen is I'll just keep adding ideas, and I'll think, oh, what if this happens? And if the idea is good enough, or if the idea is tantalizing enough to me, I won't be able to stop thinking about it. And that's my cue that I'm ready to start writing it. So in a weird way, my pre-writing, which is the thought process, is also a place to weed out bad novel ideas, or novel ideas that don't have enough in them to sustain a novel. So that's why I don't sort of write anything down. I kind of let it naturally happen. Figure if I forget all about it, if it slips out of my head somehow, then it wasn't meant to be. When I'm done with a book, I kind of push it back into the past. I jettison it wholly. So even when I'm sort of finishing up a book, I tend to be starting to think about my next one. But in general, I just, by the time I'm finishing a book, I'm excited about the next one and I want to move on.
Where did Malcolm come from for you?
Well, the premise came first, so it was sort of one of those drop in my lap premises where I was out taking a walk, and I was mulling a short story I was writing, and I needed a sort of a murder method in it. So I was like, what would be a really clever murder method? So, just as I was walking, I was sort of thinking, I was trying to remember other books that had clever ideas for murders. And then it just sort of dropped in my lap, this idea, well, what if there was a bookseller and a book blogger who wrote a list, and what if someone else used this list to as a blueprint for real crimes? So that came first. And then when I started to think up, actually the rest of the walk, I just kind of outlined this book. It's never happened to me before like that. I almost had the whole book by the end. But I knew the bookseller Malcolm would be an introvert. I knew that he was someone who was trying to sort of slide through life without causing a ripple, was someone who wanted to go to work, do his work, go home, get his nose in a book. I knew as a narrator, and he's the narrative voice in the story, I knew also that he was someone who would reveal only a small part of himself as a narrator. Think of him as like an iceberg. So you see a little tip of him above the surface, but there's a lot going on underneath. So I knew that about him as well. I just, he kind of came to me fairly fully formed. I kind of had a sense of him early on. And I also, and this is rare. I mean, I'm definitely not an autobiographical writer in any way, but I would say that Malcolm's reading habits and reading interests are very aligned with mine. Sure.
How did you choose the 8, and what sort of research did you do to dig these out?
Well, the research was the best kind of research, which is reading a lot, which is what I kind of set out to do when I began this book. I wanted to get the list together relatively soon, although I did at varying points. It was slightly different. One point it had 10, and it had different books in it. But basically, I did a couple things. One is I wanted to think of, they're not my favorite mysteries of all time, but they're specific mysteries in which they have a very clever conceit behind them around the murder that's taking place. That's one. Two, I wanted them to work in the context of the book I was writing. In other words, they could be copycatted. So for example, Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, which is an incredibly clever murder mystery novel, was not going to be easy to copycat, getting 10 people onto an isolated island and killing them all off. So that wasn't going to happen. So I did think about that as well. And then I also thought about Malcolm Kershaw writing this list and the type of reader he was. And the book goes back a little and talks about when he wrote this list. And trying to have it be a balanced list, a couple golden age, maybe a couple mid-century mysteries, a contemporary mystery like the Dawn of Tart, although that's maybe slightly less contemporary. I mean, it's getting a little old in the tooth. And then sort of spreading it out a little, having a couple that are fairly well known. I think Strangers on Train, Double Indemnity, having a couple that are more obscure, like The Drowner and maybe the Malice Aforethought. So yeah, a lot of consideration went into it, a fair amount of research, which was me reading, which is, as I said, my favorite kind of research. One of the things that I wanted to do with this book was, since I'm referencing classic whodunits, is on one level, I just wanted to make this a classic whodunit. I wanted, there's a killer out there, and Malcolm, the main character, their narrative voice, sort of narrows it down to people in his life. So we're sort of presented essentially with suspects throughout, and then it's a guessing game story. So it's got a lot of other stuff going on, but I definitely wanted it to be a classic whodunit. I've written a fair number of books where the villain sort of revealed early on. Right. This was one where I didn't quite want to do that. When you do go back and read some of these, and it's not the case with all of them, you read some of them that are quite sleepy and slow moving in a way that maybe wouldn't fly with today's thriller readers. But, there's always a huge but on this, because there is a wide range of mysteries being written, and there's definitely all sorts of sort of niche mysteries being written in the classic whodunit mode. I think the key nowadays is first of all, you can't really do anything new because everything's kind of been done. So your job as a writer is to, do something different. So take something that's kind of been done and do something different. I think that's what I was kind of trying to do.
All of these perfect murders are in a way imperfect murders because they all get caught out in the end. But in this case, if it had gone right, it was quite brilliant. Of course, these things go wrong.